a small, forgotten town where the sun baked the cracked earth and dreams often dried up like the riverbeds, there lived a young girl who had no idea her life was about to change. She wasn't extraordinary at first glance, just another kid with scraped knees and a head full of daydreams. But this girl, Eleanor, carried something inside her that even she didn't know existed. Raw, untapped talent. Elena's world revolved around books and quiet afternoons under the shade of the old mango tree near her house. She loved imagining faraway places and adventures, losing herself in stories where heroes triumphed against all odds. Her father, however, had other plans for her. He was a man weighed down by regrets, his own dreams of becoming a soccer star crushed long ago by bad luck and poor choices. Now he saw his chance for redemption, not in himself, but in his daughter. One afternoon, as Eleanor sat reading on the porch, her father stumbled upon an old soccer ball lying forgotten in the corner of their yard. Drunk and restless, he kicked it toward her, barking, "Come on, show me what you've got." Startled, Eleanor hesitated. Soccer wasn't her thing. She'd barely touched a ball in her life. But her father wasn't someone you said no too easily. So, with a mix of fear and frustration, she ran after the ball. What happened next shocked them both. Without thinking, Elena swung her leg and sent the ball soaring across the yard, straight into the rusty metal hoop nailed to the fence. It wasn't just the power of the kick. It was the precision, the instinctive aim that caught everyone off guard. Her father stared, slack-jawed, while Eleanor stood frozen, surprised by what she'd done. That moment planted a seed in her father's mind, one that would grow into an obsession. From then on, Elena's days were no longer her own. Every evening, instead of diving into her favorite novels, she found herself chasing a soccer ball under the watchful, critical eyes of her father. "Faster! Aim better! Don't let it slip!" His voice cut through the air like a whip, leaving little room for mistakes. At first, Elena resented every second of it. Why couldn't he leave her alone? Why did she have to give up her peaceful afternoons for something she didn't even care about? But as weeks turned into months, something unexpected began to happen. The more she played, the more natural it felt. Her feet seemed to understand the ball before her brain could process it. Neighbors started gathering to watch her practice, murmuring among themselves about how effortlessly she moved. Some called it magic, others simply shook their heads in disbelief. Word spread quickly, and soon people from neighboring towns came to see the girl who could bend a ball like no one else. Despite the growing attention, Eleanor remained conflicted. She hated the pressure, the endless drills, and the way her father pushed her harder each day. Yet, deep down, she couldn't deny the thrill she felt when the ball flew exactly where she wanted it to go. For the first time, she realized that maybe, just maybe, there was something special inside her waiting to be discovered. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would test her strength, challenge her heart, and ultimately transform her into someone she never thought she could become. By the time she turned 15, Eleanor was no longer just the girl from the small town with a knack for kicking a ball. She had become something bigger, a name whispered in hushed tones at local tournaments, a player coaches couldn't stop talking about. People gathered around fields just to catch a glimpse of her in action. They marveled at how she moved as if the ball were glued to her feet, and how she seemed to predict her opponent's moves before they even made them. It wasn't just skill. It was like watching poetry in motion. But behind every dazzling pass and jaw-dropping goal lay a mountain of exhaustion. Her father's relentless push had turned her life into a never-ending cycle of training, playing, and recovering. He stood on the sidelines during matches, shouting instructions that echoed louder than the cheers of the crowd. "Faster! Keep your focus!" His voice cut through the air, sharp and unrelenting. To him, every game was a chance to prove himself through her. But for Elena, each match felt heavier than the last. She played not because she wanted to, but because she didn't know how to say no. Her teammates admired her talent, but few understood. the toll it took on her. Some days she'd sit quietly in the locker room after practice, staring blankly at the wall, wondering if this was really what she was meant to do. Other times, she'd lie awake at night, replaying her father's harsh words in her head. "You're wasting your gift," he'd say when she stumbled or missed a shot. Those words stung more than any physical pain ever could. They planted seeds of doubt. Was she good enough? Did she deserve the praise people showered on her? Still, Elena kept showing up. Maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was fear of disappointing her father. Whatever it was, she continued to play, and her reputation only grew. Coaches from bigger towns began visiting her matches, scribbling notes in their worn-out notebooks. One day, a scout approached her after a particularly grueling game where she'd scored 3 goals despite being utterly exhausted. "You've got potential," he said, handing her a business card. "Think about joining a proper academy." Elena stared at the card, feeling a strange mix of excitement and dread. An academy? The idea sounded foreign yet tempting. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a world beyond her father's demands, a place where she might learn to love the game instead of resenting it. But deep down, she knew leaving wouldn't be easy. Her father wouldn't let go without a fight, and the thought of standing up to him terrified her. That same week, disaster struck. During a regional championship game, Elena collapsed on the field midway through the second half. Her legs gave out beneath her, unable to carry her weight any longer. As her teammates rushed to help her, she heard the murmur of the crowd fade into silence. All she could think about was how tired she was, not just physically, but emotionally. When her father came storming onto the field, yelling at her to get back up, something inside her snapped. Later that night, sitting alone in her room, Eleanor finally confronted the truth she'd been avoiding for years. She hated soccer, or rather, she hated what it had become under her father's control. Every goal she scored felt hollow, every victory tainted by his expectations. That realization hit her like a punch to the gut. She realized she couldn't keep living this way, sacrificing her happiness for someone else's dreams. The next morning, she mustered all her courage and faced her father. Standing tall despite the tremor in her voice, she told him exactly how she felt. "I'm not your second chance," she said, tears streaming down her face. "If I play, it'll be for me, not for you." Her father stared at her, stunned into silence. For the first time, he didn't argue or shout. Instead, he looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, part pride, part regret, and maybe even a flicker of understanding. Elena's decision to take control of her own life came with a price, one she wasn't entirely prepared for. The day after her heated confrontation with her father, the house felt eerily quiet. Her mother moved around the kitchen in silence, pretending not to notice the tension hanging thick in the air. Elena's father, for once, didn't bark orders or demand she go practice. Instead, he sat on the porch, staring off into the distance, his face unreadable. It was as if a storm had passed, leaving behind an unsettling calm. For Elena, the silence was both liberating and terrifying. On one hand, she felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She'd finally spoken her truth. But on the other, she couldn't shake the fear that her father might lash out again, or worse, withdraw completely. She spent hours in her room, replaying, their argument in her mind. Had she said too much? Not enough? What would happen now? Determined to move forward, Eleanor made a bold choice. She applied to a prestigious sports academy in the city. It wasn't easy. The application process required letters of recommendation, interviews, and proof of her skills, all things she had to navigate without her father's help. For the first time, she reached out to her coach from the local team, a kind man who had always believed in her potential. "You're ready for this," he told her, his voice steady and encouraging. But are you ready for you? The weeks leading up to her departure were a blur of emotions. Her mother hugged her tightly before bed every night, whispering prayers for her safety and success. Her father, however, remained distant. He didn't offer congratulations when she received her acceptance letter, nor did he say goodbye the morning she left. As the bus pulled away from the dusty streets of her hometown, Elena fought back tears, unsure whether she felt relief or regret. The city was overwhelming at first, a maze of tall buildings, honking cars, and people rushing past without a second glance. The academy itself was intimidating, filled with athletes who seemed worlds ahead of her. They spoke confidently about techniques and strategies she barely understood. During her first training session, she fumbled passes and missed shots she used to make effortlessly. Doubts crept in. Maybe she wasn't cut out for this after all. That moment marked a turning point. Elena decided that if soccer was going to remain a part of her life, she would reclaim it on her own terms. And though she didn't know it yet, this decision would set her on a path toward discovering not just her talent, but also her true self. But then, something unexpected happened. In the middle of a particularly grueling practice, Coach Rivera approached her. A wiry woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She had a reputation for being tough, but fair. "You're holding back," she said bluntly, crossing her arms. "Why?" Elena hesitated, caught off guard by the question. I don't know what you mean," she stammered. Coach Rivera raised an eyebrow. "Don't give me that. You've got skill, but you're playing like you're afraid to make a mistake. What's holding you back?" Her words struck a nerve. For so long, Elena had played to meet someone else's expectations, to please her father, to prove herself to others. Now, standing on this new field surrounded by strangers, she realized she didn't even know why she wanted to play anymore. Was it still just obligation? Or could it be something more? That night, alone in her dorm room, Elena thought about everything that had brought her here. The sacrifices, the arguments, the sleepless nights. She remembered the joy she used to feel as a child running barefoot through the fields near her home, kicking a makeshift ball made of rags. Back then, soccer had been simple, innocent. Somewhere along the way, it had become complicated, heavy, with the weight of other people's dreams. As she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, a spark of clarity ignited within her. If she stayed at the academy, if she kept playing, it wouldn't be for her father or anyone else. It would be for her. For the little girl who once found freedom in the rhythm of the game, for the teenager who refused to let years of pain define her future, and for the young woman determined to rediscover the love she'd lost somewhere along the way. The next morning, Elena stepped onto the field with a renewed sense of purpose. She didn't care about impressing anyone or proving her worth. All that mattered was the ball beneath her feet and the connection she felt when she played, not out of obligation, but out of choice. For the first time in years, she smiled as she ran, letting the game carry her forward. It wasn't perfect, and there were still challenges ahead, but she knew one thing for certain: she was finally playing for herself. Elena's transformation didn't happen overnight, but it was steady, like the first rays of sunlight breaking through a heavy fog. At the academy, she began to see soccer in a way she never had before. It wasn't just about scoring goals or winning matches. It was about connection. The game became a language, one that allowed her to express herself without words. Every pass, every dribble, every shot told a story, not of obligation or pressure, but of freedom and resilience. Coach Rivera noticed the change almost immediately. "You're playing with heart now," she said one afternoon after practice. Elena looked up, surprised. She hadn't realized anyone was watching her so closely, but Coach Rivera had a knack for seeing things others missed. "It's not just your feet moving anymore," she added with a small smile. "Your mind and soul are in sync." The camaraderie at the academy also played a big role in Elena's growth. For the first time, she was surrounded by people who shared her passion, not because they were forced into it, but because they truly loved the game. Her teammates came from all walks of life, each carrying their own stories of struggle and triumph. There was the quiet goalkeeper who had worked 2 jobs to afford his training gear, and the speedy winger whose family had moved across the country just so he could attend the academy. They weren't perfect, but they were real, and their determination inspired her. One evening, after a particularly intense training session, the group gathered in the common room to unwind. Someone pulled out a guitar, and soon laughter filled the air as they sang silly songs and joked about their blunders on the field. Elena found herself laughing harder than she had in years. It struck her then how different this felt from the lonely, high-pressure world she'd left behind. Here, soccer wasn't a weapon used to punish or control. It was a bond that brought people together. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were days when self-doubt crept back in, whispering cruel reminders of her past failures. During a scrimmage match, Elena missed an easy goal, and the memory of her father's disappointed face flashed in her mind. She froze for a moment, overwhelmed by shame. But instead of berating her, her teammates rushed over, patting her on the back. "Shake it off," one of them called out. "We've got your back." Their support reminded her that mistakes weren't failures. They were opportunities to learn and grow. As weeks turned into months, Elena's confidence soared. She started taking risks on the field, experimenting with moves she'd never dared to try before. Some worked brilliantly, earning cheers from her teammates and coaches. Others ended in fumbles and awkward falls, but even those moments felt lighter somehow. She learned to laugh at herself, to embrace imperfection as part of the journey. Her breakthrough came during a regional tournament hosted by the academy. The opposing team was strong, known for their aggressive style and unbeatable defense. Elena knew it would be a tough match, but she approached it with a calmness she hadn't felt before. When the whistle blew, she let instinct take over. She weaved through defenders like water flowing around rocks, her movements fluid and precise. Midway through the second half, she received a pass near the edge of the penalty box. Without hesitation, she spun around a defender and sent the ball, soaring into the top corner of the net. The crowd erupted, and for the first time, Elena celebrated not out of relief or duty, but pure joy. That night, as she lay in bed replaying the game in her mind, she realized something profound. She wasn't just getting better at soccer. She was becoming stronger as a person. The fear that had once paralyzed her was slowly fading, replaced by a quiet certainty that she could handle whatever came her way. Soccer wasn't just a game anymore, it was a reflection of who she was. A fighter, a creator, someone unafraid to carve her own path. For the first time in years, Elena fell asleep with a smile on her face, knowing she was exactly where she was meant to be. Elena's rise through the ranks was nothing short of meteoric, but it wasn't without its challenges. Word of her talent spread quickly, and soon scouts from national teams began showing up at her matches, their notebooks in hand and eyes glued to her every move. At first, the attention made her uneasy. She'd spent so much of her life playing, under the weight of expectations, that the idea of being watched so closely felt suffocating. But this time was different. This time, she reminded herself, she wasn't doing it for anyone else. She was playing for herself. Her big moment came during a qualifier match for the national team. The stakes were higher than ever before, and the pressure was palpable. The opposing team was known for their physical play and relentless defense, and Elena knew it wouldn't be easy. What she didn't expect, however, was seeing her father sitting in the stands. It had been years since they'd spoken, and his presence hit her like a punch to the gut. For a split second, doubt crept in. Would she crumble under the weight of his gaze, or could she finally prove, to him, and more importantly, to herself, that she was more than just his unfinished dream? The game started off tense. The opposing team pressed hard, forcing mistakes and cutting off every attempt Elena's team made to gain momentum. Her teammates looked to her for leadership, but Elena struggled to focus. Every time she glanced at the stands, her father's face loomed. In her mind, his expression was unreadable, part pride, part regret, and maybe even a flicker of hope. She shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. "Focus," she muttered under her breath. "This is your moment." Then, midway through the second half, everything shifted. Her team won possession near midfield, and the ball found its way to her feet. Without overthinking, Elena took off, weaving past defenders with a grace that left the crowd gasping. One player lunged at her, but she sidestepped effortlessly, her movements fluid and instinctive. Another tried to block her path, but she feinted left, then right, creating just enough space to line up a shot. As she approached the edge of the penalty, box time seemed to slow down. The noise of the crowd faded into a distant hum, and all she could hear was the rhythm of her own breathing. She struck the ball with everything she had, sending it soaring into the top corner of the net. The stadium erupted in cheers, but Elena barely heard them. All she felt was a surge of triumph, not because she'd scored, but because she'd done it on her own terms. For years, she'd carried the burden of her father's dreams, letting them dictate her every move. But this goal wasn't for him. It was for the little girl who once kicked a ragged ball under the mango tree, dreaming of something bigger. It was for the teenager who refused to let years of pain define her future. And it was for the young woman standing on that field, finally free. When the final whistle blew, Eleanor walked off the field to thunderous applause. Reporters swarmed her, asking about her incredible performance, but she only had eyes for one person. Her father stood near the exit, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then, hesitantly, he nodded. A small gesture, but one loaded with meaning. Eleanor felt a lump rise in her throat. She wanted to run to him, to scream and cry, and demand answers for all the years of hurt. But instead, she simply nodded back, acknowledging the complicated bond they shared. That night, as she sat alone in her room, Elena replayed the game in her mind. She thought about the sacrifices she'd made, the battles she'd fought, and the person she'd become along the way. She realized that while her journey had been shaped by pain, it had also been fueled by resilience. Soccer wasn't just a game anymore. It was proof that she could overcome anything life threw at her. And as she drifted off to sleep, exhausted but content, she smiled, knowing she'd earned every bit of the success coming her. By the time Eleanor turned 20, she had become a household name. Her face was plastered on billboards, her name echoed in sports commentary, and her signature move, a lightning-fast spin followed by an impossible shot, had earned its own nickname, the Phantom Strike. Yet, despite all the fame and accolades, what truly defined her wasn't the trophies or headlines. It was the way she carried herself, with quiet confidence, humility, and a fire that refused to burn out. Her first appearance on the world stage came during the World Cup qualifiers. The stadium buzzed with anticipation as fans from across the globe filled the seats, waving flags and chanting their team's anthems. Elena stood on the field, taking it all in. The sea of colours, the deafening roar of the crowd, the weight of millions of eyes watching her every step. For a moment, she felt small, overwhelmed by the enormity of it all. But then she glanced at her teammates, their faces etched with determination, and remembered why she was there. This wasn't just about her, it was about them, about representing something bigger than herself. The match was brutal. Their opponents were relentless, pushing hard from the very first whistle. Every pass, every tackle, every sprint felt like a test of endurance. Elena's legs burned, her lungs screamed for air, but she kept going. She couldn't afford to stop. Not now. Not when so much was on the line. Midway through the second half, her team found themselves trailing by a single goal. Time was running out, and frustration began creeping into their play. That's when Elena stepped up. With less than 10 minutes left on the clock, she received a pass near midfield. Without hesitation, she took off, her feet moving faster than her mind could process. One defender lunged at her, but she sidestepped effortlessly. Another closed in, but she spun around him, her movements fluid and precise. As she approached the penalty box, the crowd held its breath. She planted her foot, drew back her leg, and struck the ball with everything she had. It soared past the goalkeeper, hitting the back of the net with a satisfying thud. The stadium exploded. Fans leapt to their feet, cheering wildly as her teammates rushed toward her, lifting her into the air. For a brief moment, Elena allowed herself to bask in the glory of it all. But when she looked up into the stands, her heart skipped a beat. There he was, her father, standing silently amidst the chaos, his weathered face streaked with tears. His expression was unreadable, but his presence spoke volumes. After years of silence, of pushing her away and pulling her closer in equal measure, he had come to see her shine. After the game, Elena found him waiting outside the locker room. He looked older than she remembered. His shoulders slumped under the weight of years spent chasing dreams that never came true. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Then, finally, he spoke. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice trembling. "I didn't know. I thought I was helping you." Elena swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "You did help me," she replied softly. "But not in the way you think. You taught me how to fight, how to push through even when it hurts. And because of that, I learned how to stand on my own." Her father nodded, guilt and pride warring in his eyes. "You're stronger than I ever was," he admitted. "I'm proud of you." Those words, simple yet profound, hit Elena like a tidal wave. For so long she'd craved his approval, longing for him to see her as more than just an extension of himself. Now, hearing him say those words, she realized she no longer needed them. She had already proven her worth to herself, to the world, and most importantly, to the little girl who once dreamed under the mango tree. As they parted ways, Elena felt a strange sense of closure. She knew their relationship would never be perfect, and that was okay. What mattered was that she had forgiven him, and more importantly, forgiven herself. Soccer had given her far more than fame. It had given her the strength to confront her past and the courage to shape her future. That night, as she lay in bed replaying the day's events, Elena smiled. She had reached heights she never imagined possible, but deep down, she knew this was just the beginning. Her journey wasn't over. It was only getting started. Years later, when Elena finally hung up her cleats, she didn't do it with sadness, but with a deep sense of fulfillment. Her career had been nothing short of extraordinary. World Cup victories, record-breaking goals, and accolades that would forever cement her place in history. Yet, as she stood on the podium one last time, listening to the crowd chant her name, she realized something profound. Her legacy wasn't in the trophies or the headlines. It was in the lives she touched along the way. After retiring, Elena returned to her roots. Not to the small town where she grew up, but to the spirit of those forgotten places where dreams often felt out of reach. She remembered the countless kids who used to gather around the fields after her matches, their eyes wide with admiration. "How did you do that?" they'd ask, pointing to her feet. "Can you teach us?" At the time, she'd laugh it off, too focused on her own journey to think much about theirs. But now, those memories came flooding back, reminding her of the responsibility that came with success. Determined to give back, Elena founded a foundation aimed at supporting young athletes from underserved communities. She wanted to create opportunities for kids who, like her, might have untapped potential but lacked the resources or encouragement to pursue their dreams. The first camp opened on a dusty field, not unlike the one where she'd learned to play all those years ago. Dozens of children showed up, their faces glowing with excitement despite the scorching sun. Some were barefoot. Others wore mismatched uniforms cobbled together from whatever they could find. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the spark in their eyes, the same spark that had once flickered inside her. On the opening day of the camp, Elena gathered the kids under the shade of a tree. They sat cross-legged, staring up at her with awe. For a moment, she felt nervous. How could she possibly put into words everything she'd learned over the years? Then she smiled, remembering the simplicity of her own beginnings. "Listen," she began, her voice warm and steady. "You don't have to love soccer right away. Sometimes you find your heart along the way. Just keep showing up, keep trying, and trust yourself. You're stronger than you think." Her words resonated deeply with the kids, many of whom had faced hardships far greater than anything she'd endured. Over the weeks, she watched them grow, not just as players, but as people. There was a shy boy who barely spoke at first, but slowly came out of his shell as he gained confidence on the field. And there was a girl who reminded Eleanor so much of herself, quiet and reserved, yet fiercely determined. When the girl scored her first goal during a friendly match, Elena saw tears streaming down her face. It was a moment that brought everything full circle. As the years passed, Eleanor's foundation expanded, reaching more towns and inspiring more young athletes. She traveled often, sharing her story and encouraging kids to chase their dreams, not just in sports but in life. She emphasized resilience, teamwork, and the importance of finding joy in what you do. "It's not about being perfect," she'd tell them. "It's about giving your best and learning from every fall." One day, while visiting a new camp, Eleanor noticed a familiar figure sitting quietly in the corner. It was her father, older, now his hair streaked with grey. He had come unannounced, just as he had done years ago when she played her first big match. This time, however, his presence didn't fill her with dread. Instead, she walked over and hugged him, a gesture that surprised them both. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything." Her father nodded, his eyes glistening. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. And this time, Elena believed him. Looking back on her life, Elena knew she hadn't taken the easiest path. She had fought battles, faced doubts, and carried burdens no child should ever have to bear. But through it all, she had discovered something invaluable: the power to rise above circumstances, to turn pain into purpose, and to inspire others to do the same. Her journey wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to every kid who dared to dream, every parent who hoped for a better future, and every person who refused to let fear define them.